Now that we've colored our illustration, we're going to move on to adding lights and shadows. Feel free to be as realist or as not realist as you want. I don't have a very realistic style, so it doesn't make sense to me to get very anal about shadows and lights. I like quirky and I like weird kind of things, so that's how my shadows should look too. However, if that is not your case, go ahead and get as crazy as you want with shadows. The last thing that we'll have to do is add some highlights and some details, so let's get to it.
Adding shadows and small glows can really add a lot of detail to your illustration and make it look more finished. You should be careful with how much detail you add since we're going to animate this, but if you want to go crazy for the illustration part and then just maybe reduce a little bit the complexity when we divide our layers, you're more than welcome to do that. For now, we're just going to be talking about how to add a shadow. You can go as crazy as you want with the lighting and you can be as realistic as you want. But even if, like me, you're not in the business of realism, adding like a little shadow here or, things around so that it doesn't feel like things are floating will make your illustration really stand out and feel part of the space. For now, I just realized a couple hiccups in our illustration. The first, that these are supposed to be of this grayish color. And we know how to do that already. And then that it would be ideal if this crossing path matched our little illustration. So I'll move it around here. Let's see our reference. So here we go. To add shadows, we're going to be using a little bit of a technique which is also going to be useful for later when we divide our layers, which is that we're going to want to have a stroke, a shadow, and a fill underneath. And let me explain this first with just a square. So especially this is for the case of the shadows that are inside of the objects. So imagine that we have this square and we want to add a shadow to it somewhere here. What we would do is, in the top layer, we can make like a little bit of a thing like this, and then make it blue because it's our shadow. I'm making it bigger than my square because with my square, as we know using our path finder, I can select both and delete it and stay just with this part. It did make it this color, but no, we just go like that. Or you could just make a clipping mask by clicking Command 7. Both would work. However, imagine that we had a shadow that was different, of a different color. And we're going to be working with blending modes and transparencies in like about 2 minutes. If this was the case, it might happen that if we don't want our shadow to have a stroke, as you can see, our fill or our shadow thing is going onto our stroke. So what we have to do to avoid that is remove the stroke. So we have our first layer, which is the fill. Then we have our shadow. And then we just copy and paste our fill in a new layer. I'm going to call it stroke. And then simply add a stroke. And we want it to be as big as the things that we like. So as you can see this way, we make sure that our stroke is above this line. And the reason to not leave is that it will look thicker than others. And you can only see it when you have others nearby. You can tell the difference. I don't know if you can tell here. But you will be able, you would be like, why is this line looks darker than this others? And it's usually because you have a stroke behind it. You can get away with it. I've definitely done it. But we're keeping things professional here. So now, let's start putting some shadows into our art house. The first place where we want to add a shadow is down here where our little awning is. We want to make sure that there's something acknowledging that arc. And as part of the fun of adding layers comes the fun of starting to divide your illustration for animation. So we're going to go deep into our grouped illustration, put the awning on its own layer. Then underneath, we're going to make our first shadow. Let's lock our pencils so nothing strange happens here. I'm going to be making my shadows in blue and using a blending mode called overlay. You can use whatever you want. And that blending mode will be in, if you go to the properties of your layer and to opacity, and you click the word opacity, in here where it says normal, you have the different blending modes, and we're going to be using overload. You can also, decide to put it down or bring it up and just leave it at the point where you think it looks best. Now, seeing this with this shadow, I've realized that it would be nice that this sky, our awning, matched this line. I'm going to do that. You can see that an illustration is never finished until you do everything. The shape of everything can change. We also want to make shadows that are grounding the illustration on the floor, as we said. And for that, we're going to bring back our grid here. And on a different layer, we are just going to follow our grid a little bit. Maybe 3 squares. And again, we want this layer to be in overlay. With the pedestrian crossing, we're going to bring it out and start dividing things. And we're going to paste it in place, bring it down a little bit where we think it could match our illustration, and we're going to make it blue. With the eyedrop tool, it also will take in consideration the blending mode. What I'm trying to do is to get this shadow to match that point. Oh, let's see. But I don't want everything to move, which is what is happening. So I do like it, but I wish that there was like a little bit more of the shadow on the side. So I just moved it over a little and back to bringing our points to where the pedestrian crossing is. Another way in which we can make shadows is to just get the little element that we want, copy it and paste it like we did with the pedestrian crossing, and then just play with turning it around and putting it flat. And we are going to make sure that it's on our grid, and we can distort it a little bit more to enhance that shadow. It's important that you think if you want all your elements to have one point of lighting or various points of lighting. I'm personally not very into necessarily thinking that this is a realistic place, but more into thinking of ways that I can use my grid and show my grid, and changing the direction of the shadows a little bit, especially on an element that you won't see it that much, will help me with that task. Let's see how that looks without the grid. Looks nice. And we need to make sure that our shadow is below it. So it's also good to name your layers at this stage, because we're going to start making many layers. So try to keep everything clean. We are also going to be putting like a little shadowy decoration on our awning, and for that it's going to be good that we divide it even further. So we have awning top, and then bottom. That's all right. And now we want to have a fill. We're going to take the stroke out of these, and we want to have now a stroke. Another way that you can duplicate layers instead of copying and pasting it on top, it's by clicking Option, and with the selected layers that you want to duplicate, just drag them and move them like above themselves, and there it is. It's making like 2 layers. I didn't know that this line was black, so we will need to fix that here. Now it's blue. So here it is. When now, if I am right, we have the line and the bottom. And here we should put, instead of copy, we can put line or stroke. You can name it with a convention you want. And fill. And now what we need is 2 shadows. Lock your layer so that your pen doesn't bother you. And then another little one here. And this is quite important. For a clipping mask to work in 2 things at the same time, these have to be grouped or made together. So you can unite them using this. Let's see if it works. And now we're going to get our fill. And on top of it, paste it. And make a clipping mask. And that should work. Let's check. This would be awning shadows. And let's see that we have every layer. So we have this, which will be the bottom for later, and the top. Don't need this layer. And we need our shadow, which is there. And then we need our top. Let's move the bottom on top of here. Okay, so we have something. We have our awning done. Now we have to do our trees, and our little poles. So for the poles, what can we do? We can do for the tree something similar to what we did with our bush. If you're ever confused about what is inside of here, like what's in front of what on these groups, you can go into it and you can lock layers and unsee layers and things like that. But I tend to accidentally leave things unchecked or blocked and it gets annoying. So I try not to go into there that often. I try to just double click because that's how my brain works. But you know, you might be smarter. So I made everything blue and I'm making it into one shape. But let's see. In order to make it into one shape, I kind of don't want this, guys, because it made that annoying shape, and that's not going to be great. The more points that there is, the harder that's going to be to transform it in easily. And here you can use your transform tool. First, put it down. Also, I deleted the pole. I need an extra one. So there it is. And now we are just bringing it down. Try to keep it here. And we want to distort it a little bit because, like, you know, that circle is not great. And it will also be nice that it's a little bit shorter. Like, we don't have like a gigantic kind of thing. And, you know, we can just because of the type of shape that it is, we can just bring this in and that will make it smaller. And use our, let's lock our shadow so we don't take anything that we don't want. And we can bring, and our art house, lock every point that you don't want to move. And let's bring it down here. Now we will want our little grid to help us with this task. See how that looks from afar? I think it looks pretty good. And let's take the grid to fully see. Oops. There, to fully see if it's working. So that is quite nice for now. And to do the other one, it's quite simple. Just copy it and paste it. And we move it up here. I'm going to ungroup these guys temporarily so that I can move these two like a little bit closer. Maybe somewhere here. That looks nice. And now we want to make sure that our shadows are on its own layer. Well, they were, but we want them to be underneath. Crossing lamps. Shadow. Crossing lamps. And then here, crossing shadow.